On this edition of the UFO Book Library, we are continuing our exploration of Jacques Vallée's classic trilogy with Book 2, Confrontations. The book we're cataloguing today forms a critical part of what many readers consider Jacques Vallée's most important sequence of UFO works. Earlier titles such as Passport to Magonia and Dimensions expanded the UFO conversation beyond simple extraterrestrial explanations and into something far more complex. Confrontations, a scientist's search for alien contact, moves the discussion into territory that should, in theory, be easier to resolve. Instead of focusing primarily on witness testimony or philosophical interpretation, Vallee turns his attention to the physical traces that UFO encounters sometimes leave behind. In UFO research, trace evidence represents one of the most compelling forms of data. If unidentified craft interact with the physical world, they should occasionally leave measurable marks. Ground impressions, scorched vegetation, electromagnetic disturbances and unusual material samples all fall into this category. Vallee refers to these incidents as confrontations because they involve moments when the phenomenon appears to collide directly with the physical environment. The expectation might be that such evidence would finally settle the UFO debate. Yet, as Vallee demonstrates throughout this book, the opposite often occurs. Even when physical traces are present, the mystery rarely becomes clearer. Instead, it grows deeper and more difficult to interpret. Jacques Vallée remains one of the most respected analytical thinkers in the history of UFO research. Unlike many authors in the field, Vallee approaches the subject with a scientific mindset, shaped by his background in astronomy and computer science. His career has been rooted in the study of complex systems and the analysis of large sets of information, skills that translate naturally into the investigation of anomalous phenomena. What makes Vallee particularly significant is his refusal to adopt a fixed ideological position about UFOs. He doesn't attempt to prove that the phenomenon must represent extraterrestrial spacecraft, nor does he dismiss the encounters as mere hallucinations or hoaxes. Instead, Vallee studies patterns within the available data. His work consistently focuses on how the phenomenon behaves, how it affects witnesses, and how it interacts with human culture. In Confrontations, this analytical perspective becomes even more visible. Vallee writes not as a promoter of extraordinary claims, but as a scientist attempting to understand evidence that refuses to fit conventional models. The tone of the book often reflects the frustration of someone who's encountered anomalies that seem real yet resist definitive explanation. The central subject of Confrontations is the physical dimension of UFO encounters. Vallee investigates cases in which witnesses report not only seeing unidentified objects, but also discovering measurable effects on the environment. These cases include landing traces in soil, burned or flattened vegetation, unusual radiation readings, and mechanical disruptions affecting nearby equipment. Such cases occupy a special place in UFO research because they appear to move beyond purely anecdotal reports. If the phenomenon leaves physical marks, those marks can potentially be measured, photographed, and analysed. In theory, trace evidence should provide investigators with an opportunity to apply scientific methods to UFO questions. However, Vallee's investigation reveals that the situation is rarely that straightforward. Trace evidence often appears ambiguous or incomplete. Investigations may begin too late to preserve uncontaminated samples. Environmental factors can interfere with analysis, and witness reports may contain inconsistencies. Instead of delivering clear answers, these cases often raise additional questions about how the phenomenon interacts with the physical world. The cases discussed in Confrontations cover a range of encounters where physical traces were reported. Vallee examines incidents involving circular landing marks, altered soil composition, electromagnetic interference with vehicles or equipment, and psychological effects experienced by witnesses during these encounters. By presenting these cases together, Vallee demonstrates that physical traces appear more frequently than skeptics sometimes assume. Yet the data rarely resolves the mystery. Measurements may confirm that unusual disturbances occurred, but they often fail to identify a clear cause. Soil samples might show abnormal characteristics without revealing the mechanism that produced them. Burned vegetation may indicate intense heat without explaining the source of that heat. This ambiguous quality of the data becomes one of the central themes of the book. The phenomenon appears capable of interacting with the environment, yet it rarely leaves behind evidence that can be traced back to a conventional technological origin. Instead, the traces often seem incomplete, as though the event briefly touched the physical world before disappearing again. The value of Confrontations lies in its disciplined examination of the evidence problem within UFO research. Vallee does not attempt to present trace cases as definitive proof of extraterrestrial visitation. Instead, he approaches them as scientific puzzles. Each case becomes an opportunity to explore how anomalies emerge and how investigators attempt to study them. For readers building a serious UFO library, this approach is extremely valuable. Many UFO books emphasize dramatic narratives while paying little attention to the practical challenges of investigation. Vallee's work reminds readers that understanding the phenomenon requires careful fieldwork, rigorous documentation, and an awareness of how easily evidence can be contaminated or even misinterpreted. What separates Confrontations from many other UFO titles is its emphasis on empirical investigation. Instead of focusing solely on witness testimony, Vallee attempts to follow the physical clues left behind by encounters. This approach places the UFO question within a framework that resembles traditional scientific inquiry. Yet the results remain frustratingly incomplete. Even when investigators collect samples and perform measurements, the evidence rarely leads to a definitive explanation. Vallee suggests that the phenomenon may behave in ways that deliberately resist simple classification. It can interact with the physical world, yet it does not remain present long enough to be studied under controlled conditions. One of the most striking insights in Confrontations is the realization that physical evidence does not necessarily resolve the UFO mystery. Instead of confirming a straightforward extraterrestrial visitation model, trace cases often reveal behavior that seems strangely elusive. The phenomenon may leave marks on the ground or disrupt equipment, yet these effects rarely provide enough information to reconstruct exactly what occurred. This pattern leads Vallee toward a broader conclusion. The UFO phenomenon may not behave like a conventional technological object that can be captured and analyzed. Instead, it may represent a form of interaction that briefly intersects with the physical environment before disappearing again. If this interpretation is correct, then the challenge facing investigators is not merely technological, but conceptual. From a collector's perspective, Confrontations is an important component of Vallee's core body of work. It forms part of the sequence that includes Dimensions and continues into later titles that explore the deeper implications of UFO encounters. Early hardback editions with intact dust jackets are particularly desirable among collectors, as they represent the earliest physical versions of the book that has become increasingly influential. Because Vallee's books often function as reference works, many copies show signs of heavy use, including annotations and highlighting. So clean copies with minimal markings therefore tend to be more valuable. Signed copies by Jacques Vallée are also highly sought after and can command significant prices when the authenticity of the signature is verified. Within the UFO Book Library scoring system, Confrontations, a scientist's search for alien contact, receives a score of 9.5 out of 10. The book earns a very high score because of its disciplined focus on physical trace evidence and the contribution to the serious investigation of UFO encounters. The slight deduction reflects the unavoidable limitations of the data. Many of the cases Vallee examines remain unresolved, and the available evidence often lacks the precision required for definitive conclusions. However, these limitations reflect the reality of the UFO field rather than any weaknesses in Vallee's analysis. Reading Confrontations naturally leads readers into several other areas of UFO research. One direction involves exploring additional trace evidence cases, including studies of landing marks, soil analysis, and electromagnetic disturbances associated with close encounters. Another path leads deeper into Vallee's own writings, where he continues to explore the behavioral patterns of the phenomenon. The book also encourages readers to examine the methods used in scientific anomaly investigation. Understanding how researchers collect samples, analyze environmental disturbances, and evaluate witness testimony becomes essential when dealing with the phenomena that resists conventional explanation. Balanced inquiry also benefits from skeptical perspectives that examine how evidence can be misinterpreted or contaminated. Confrontations represents Jacques Vallée's attempt to grapple directly with the physical side of the UFO mystery. Instead of debating beliefs or theories, the book examines the moments when the phenomenon appears to leave measurable traces in the environment. These cases should, in theory, provide the clearest path toward understanding what UFO encounters represent. Yet Vallée's investigation reveals a paradox. Even when physical evidence is present, the phenomenon rarely becomes easier to explain. The traces exist, but they lead investigators only part of the way toward an answer. In that sense, Confrontations captures the central challenge of UFO research. The phenomenon appears real enough to leave marks in the world, yet elusive enough to avoid definitive classification. For anyone building a serious UFO library, this book stands as a crucial reminder that the UFO question cannot be solved by speculation alone. It must be approached with careful observation, disciplined investigation, and a willingness to confront evidence that refuses to behave in predictable ways. Now, if you've read Confrontations, leave your score out of 10 in the comments below. And as always, if you are an author who's written a book on any aspect of the UFO phenomenon and you'd like to send a copy to the channel for consideration, you'll find links in the description below. And of course, let me know in the comments which title you'd like to see pulled from the shelf next. Now get the full story. Buy this book on Amazon via our easy links in the description. If you enjoyed this episode on one of Jacques Vallée's books, we recommend this video. Or for a deeper dive, why not check out more of Jacques Vallée's work in this dedicated playlist? Please support the channel by simply subscribing, liking, and sharing our videos to help us so we can bring you more.